You are listening to Perfect English with Danny. Improve your English every day. Never stop learning. Welcome to a new episode from Perfect English with Danny. In this episode, we will focus on conversation. And the topic for today is talking about food. Now, before we start to learn about the words and the different phrases we can use to express ourselves when we want to talk about food, I would like to start with a small conversation that happened between me and one of my friends. In this conversation, I'm going to show you how limited a person can be if they don't have the right words, or I'm not going to say the right or wrong words. I'm just going to say better words to express yourself when you want to talk about food. I was invited the other day to a friend's house for dinner, and most of the talk was about food. Now we will listen to the conversation, and you will see how limited the conversation was because my friend Tony did not know enough words to express what he wanted to say about food. We will listen to the conversation first, and then we will learn words and phrases that can be used in conversation like this to enrich the conversation and to express ourselves better when we want to talk about food. So let's get to it. First, we were sitting in the living room just talking about flavors and taste and things like that. What kind of food do you like, Tony?
Oh, I like food that leaves a hot taste in your mouth. And I also like food that is slightly salty, and if you add herbs to it, it's always better. You know, in general, I like food that has a lot of taste and not food that has no taste, no flavor at all.
I see. So, what are you cooking for us tonight?
I'm cooking steak. Oh, by the way, how do you like your steak? Personally, I like to cook it a little bit less than usual, but not to the point when it is not cooked well.
I like my steak medium rare. Just the way you like it.
Oh, that's great. You know, I like food that is not bad or hard to digest. I prefer cooking with vegetables that are grown without chemicals, you know, the old-fashioned natural way.
So you prefer fresh ingredients?
Oh, yes. I don't like food that has chemicals added to make it last longer. I like to use fruit and vegetables that are being grown and harvested at the moment. You know, they're always fresh like that.
Oh, that's great. And later, as we sat at the table to eat...
Right. There's more salad. Who wants to eat a second plate?
Oh, yes, please. It was absolutely delicious.
There's more dressing here. Just do it yourself.
Okay, I'll do it. Thanks.
Make sure to keep a bit of room for some sweet dishes. Do you want me to fill your glass again?
Yes. Thank you. So, you see, in this conversation, I'm pretty sure that you understood everything Tony said, as I did. But the problem is that some of the things he said sounded unnatural. I'll give you some examples. For example, Tony said, I like food that leaves a hot taste in your mouth. Well, what do you mean, Tony? Do you mean hot, spicy food? Wouldn't that be a lot easier to say? You know, sometimes because we don't know enough words, we don't know the words that express this long phrase or long sentence sometimes, we tend to use a longer sentence when there is simply one word that can express all that. And that is always better. Whether you're talking or you're writing, using one word that expresses a lot of meaning is better than using a lot of words that express very little meaning. I'll give you some other examples. Tony said, I'm cooking steak. Oh, by the way, how do you like your steak? He said, personally, I like to cook it a little bit less than usual, but not to the point when it is not cooked well. Well, that is a little bit too long to simply say medium rare. Just the way I responded. I said, I like my steak medium rare, just the way you like it. So because Tony didn't know the word medium rare, he used instead, I like to cook it a little bit less than usual, but not to the point when it is not cooked well. Oh my God, that's a lot of words just to say 2 words, medium rare. That's all. And then Tony said something else. He said, I like food that is not bad or hard to digest. Well, that's kind of strange. It's when we say bad food, what do you mean bad food? Bad food can have a lot of meanings. What do you mean by bad food? What do you mean hard to digest? I mean, usually people don't use the word hard to digest. They use one word, that is stodgy. But don't worry, we're going to talk about all these words in a minute. I'm just pointing out the problems in this conversation so that you feel the importance of learning these new words. It's always important to know why you're learning what you're learning, because that helps you relate to the information you're learning, and then you will learn it better. So anyway, let's go back to what Tony said. He also said, I like to use fruit and vegetables that are being grown and harvested at the moment. Well, that's kind of, I'm not going to say impossible, but that's so strange as well. What kind of fruit and vegetables are being grown and harvested at the same time? Or, as he said, at the moment. Maybe he just wanted to say in season. That's all. The fruit that you find fresh in the market at the moment, that is fruit or vegetables in season. That's all. So, you see, instead of saying all this big expression that is kind of strange, you can use a couple of words that are natural and everybody can understand you even better. Your English will be a lot stronger this way. And then when we sat at the table, Tony used a kind of funny language. I understood what he said, absolutely understood everything he said. And that's not a big deal. Remember, it's no shame that he made those mistakes. We're just here to help. And you might have made those mistakes before. Don't worry. That's why we're here. We're here to learn how to make our English better. And remember, Tony's English is not bad. Tony's English is good. He just needs to make it better. He just needs to improve it. So, when we sat at the table to eat, Tony said, there's more salad. Who wants to eat a second plate? Well, that's so strange because, first of all, plates are just the things that we put food in, so we can't eat them. We eat dishes. But even if he says, who wants to eat a second dish, that's also kind of strange because, or it's not strange actually, it means something else. It means that maybe, you started with steak and now you want something else, a different dish. Well, that doesn't usually happen, especially in an invitation. So that is strange. Maybe Tony just wanted to say, who wants seconds? That's all. Wants seconds, and that means a second serving of something, not who wants to eat a second plate. And then he said, there's more dressing. He was telling me about the dressing for the salad, and he was being generous, of course. And he was trying to tell me, just take as much as you like. It's over there. Just do it yourself, he said. Just do it yourself. That's kind of rude. He's not being a good host. Just do it yourself. It's kind of rude telling me I don't want to serve you. Just go ahead and do it yourself. I understood what he meant, but what he actually meant to say, just help yourself, not just do it yourself.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Looking to enhance your English skills while exploring a world of knowledge? Then English Plus Podcast website is just for you. Dive into diverse topics ranging from science to literature, history to business, and myths to modern insights. Each episode from our podcast or article from our magazine is a journey of learning and discovery, designed to not only improve your language skills, but also broaden your understanding of the world. Join us at English Plus Podcast, where language meets limitless learning. Tune in today and take your English to the next level. Visit EnglishPlusPodcast.com to start your journey. English Plus Podcast, language, learning, enlightenment. Never stop learning with English Plus. And finally, Tony said something about sweet dishes. he said, make sure to keep a bit of room for some sweet dishes. Well, what does that mean? How many dishes are we going to eat for dessert? And instead of saying sweet dishes, he might have used pudding or a sweet or afters, or even dessert is okay. But, usually people at home, they use the word a sweet or afters or pudding. Dessert is fine as well, but not sweet dishes. And then he asked me, do you want me to fill your glass again? And that sounded a little bit rude as well. Because, usually you ask people, can I refill your glass, or would you like me to refill your glass? That's a lot more polite. But do you like me to fill your glass again? It's like, haven't you drunk enough? Do you want more? You see, it sounds a little bit rude. So again, what we need to learn from this conversation is that it's important to learn words and phrases that will first help you use fewer words to express a lot of meaning instead of doing the opposite, use a lot of words to express very little meaning. And that's always better in conversation and in writing, of course. And the second thing we learned that sometimes if you don't know the right words or phrases to use in certain situations, you might be using some rude ones. And that is not good. It's not a problem for me because Tony's my friend and I know that his English is good, but still needs some improvement. So I don't mind. And nobody should mind. And nobody actually will criticize you for saying whatever you want to say. Our goal here is to make our English better. It's not to criticize our English or to criticize anybody's English. So let's get to it now and let's start talking about some of the words, some of the useful words you can use to enhance a conversation like this, or to talk about even other things that can be used other than the words and the expressions that we used in this conversation. So first, let's focus on flavors and tastes, the adjectives we use to describe flavors and tastes. Remember, Tony said he likes food that leaves a hot taste in his mouth. Well, instead of saying that, he could simply say hot or spicy. Hot and spicy food is actually food that leaves a hot taste in your mouth, but we don't usually say it this way. So the food can be hot or spicy, or the opposite of that, it can be mild. That means not hot and spicy. It is okay. And sometimes with a little bit of spice, but not too much. So that is mild food. But if you go to the extreme and you want to talk about food that has very little flavor or almost no flavor at all, we call it bland. And that's not good. It's a negative word. So bland food is food that has no flavor or actually very little flavor. Usually most people like mild food. There is flavor, but not too much spice or not too hot. So the words we have here, hot, spicy, mild, or bland on the negative side. And now we go to other words to describe flavors, like if the food has a lot of salt, you can call it salty. Now, salty for some people might be okay, and for some other people, it can be very negative. Some people don't like salt in their food or don't like too much salt in their food. So it could be salty, but that is actually not a negative word or a positive word. It depends on the perspective. It depends on how you like your food. It can be sugary, the opposite of salty, and that has a lot of sugar. So salty or sugary. But if it has too much sugar, especially with some desserts where you can't even finish because it contains too much sugar, we call it sickly. Sickly, that means too much sugar, you can't even finish a small piece of it, whatever that dessert may be. So we have salty, sugary, and the negative word is sickly, too much sugar. Now we have another adjective here that is used to describe pleasant, slightly salty or with herbs food, and that is when we say savory food. Savory is a very positive word that talks about pleasant food, slightly salty, herbs, perfectly seasoned. That is when we say savory. Now, notice that when people describe different dishes, savory can be used to talk about the opposite of sweet. You know, when you want to make dishes, you can say that you make sweet dishes for any kind of dessert, or you can say you can make savory dishes. Now, savory dishes for the opposite. I'm not going to say salty because salty is the wrong word here. So savory dishes, these are not sweets. These can be main courses, entrees, etc. So, but savory as an adjective for flavor, it means pleasant, slightly salty, or with herbs. Now, food can also be sour like a lemon. And sour is usually sharp, often unpleasant taste. It's not sweet. It is like a lemon. But some people like sour. It depends on what you're eating, of course. Some food can have an unpleasant, sharp taste, just like some very strong medicine. And that is when we call it bitter. Bitter food is this sharp taste that is usually unpleasant. We have other adjectives for food. We say tasty or delicious. And when we say tasty food, delicious food, that means has a good taste or flavor. The opposite of that is tasteless. Tasteless is food with no flavor at all. So it is kind of close to bland, but bland has very little flavor. Tasteless has no flavor at all. No, that happens in hospitals sometimes. I hope you never have to eat hospital food because it is actually tasteless. Well, the best hospital food is bland. Maybe it's good for patients, but it's not good for everyday food. Anyway, tasty or delicious food has a good taste or flavor. Tasteless food has no flavor at all. Now, there's also another interesting adjective, and that is moreish. M-O-R-E-I-S-H, moreish. And that means having a pleasant taste, so you want to eat more. And there comes the word moreish. If somebody says the food was moreish, that's a compliment for the person who made the food. So let's recap quickly. We used the words hot and spicy, and the opposite of hot spicy is mild, bland with very little flavor, and it's a negative word. Salty for a lot of salt, sugary for a lot of sugar. If the food has too much sugar, we call it sickly. If it is pleasant, slightly salty with herbs, we say savory. If it has a sharp, unpleasant taste like a lemon, we call it sour. If it has an unpleasant, sharp taste like medicine, we call it bitter. If it is tasty or delicious, it has good taste or flavor. If it is tasteless, it has no flavor at all. And if the food has a pleasant taste and you want to eat more of it, we can call it moreish. Now, I'm pretty sure that if Tony knew these words, his conversation or the English he used in his conversation would have been a lot better. Now we will move to another part where Tony's English was not that strong. And that is the part when he talked about the appearance, the presentation, and the quality of food. Now, let me give you an example. When he talked about the steak, he said, I like to cook it a little bit less than usual, but not to the point when it is not cooked well. Well, that is a little bit too much, as I said before, for just saying medium rare. Now, especially for steak, we can say medium rare for exactly what Tony said. Cook it a little bit less than usual, but not to the point when it is not cooked well. So let's start with the point that when it is not cooked well, what do we call that? Well, it's simply called undercooked or underdone. Maybe some people like their steak undercooked or underdone, not me, and usually most people like their steak medium rare. But anyway, some people like their steak to be well done. Well done is cooked well. So we have underdone, not cooked enough, or not cooked well, or undercooked, we say. We have, for the steak, especially for the steak, we say medium rare, that is just about the middle, and we have well done, and that is cooked well. And if it is cooked too much, and that's also a problem, it's a negative thing, cooked too much, we call it overcooked or overdone. These words are especially used with different kinds of meat, because meat is usually very delicate about how much you want to keep the meat in the oven or in the pan, etc. So you don't want your food to be overcooked, overdone, or undercooked or underdone. Now, something else, we talked about the fruit and vegetables, and he talked about vegetables that are grown without chemicals, the old-fashioned natural way, which is too much or too long to simply say organic fruit and vegetables. This is the meaning of food that is grown without artificial chemicals. We simply say organic fruit and vegetables. He also talked about food that is being grown and harvested at the moment. And as I said earlier, we don't usually say that. We simply say the food, or especially we're talking here about fruit and vegetable, they're not in season or they are in season. Well, sometimes you may look at maybe a mango and you say, I'm afraid this mango is a bit unripe. Now, unripe means it's not ready to eat. The opposite of ripe. Now, for fruit and vegetables, it is important to be ripe, and that means ready to eat. If the fruit or vegetables is not ready to eat, you can say it's unripe. Sometimes they're unripe simply because they're not really in season at the moment. Naturally, you don't find mango in the market at the moment, so it is not in season. That's why it's unripe. Instead of saying harvested and grown at the moment, you simply say in season or not in season. He also talked about food that is hard to digest. Well, we can use the word heavy to talk about food like that, and the opposite is light. Well, heavy food is usually hard to digest. Light food is the opposite. And sometimes we can use a word that means both heavy, hard to digest, and that is the word stodgy. S-T-O-D-G-Y. Stodgy food is heavy and hard to digest. So you see, when we learn good words like stodgy, you can use one word instead of a phrase or even a sentence. And let's see if we have some other words we can add to our conversations about the appearance, presentation, or quality of food. If you look at something in your fridge and this thing is not good to eat because it is too old, you can simply say it has gone off. Like, for example, this milk has gone off. I think we should throw it out. And when we talk about diets, for example, we talked about heavy, light food, stodgy food, organic, ripe, unripe, in season, etc., different types of food. But what kind of diet? And diet is simply the things you eat, the kind of food you eat. You should try to have a balanced diet. We're talking about eating a little bit of everything. Not too much, not too little of any particular thing. You should eat all kinds of food, but not too much and not too little, because your body needs all kind of food or all kind of nutrients in the food. Well, we have a couple of words as well to talk about, and that is the junk food. Of course, that is a very famous word. You might have heard it before. It is about food that is unhealthy but easy and quick to eat. There's also another kind of food which Tony actually talked about, the food that has chemicals. He said he didn't like food that had chemicals added to make it last longer. Well, instead of saying all this, he's simply talking about processed food or canned food, which is kind of the same thing. But canned food, especially when it is put in a can. Anyway, processed food is a general word for that, and that means food that is treated with chemicals to preserve it or give it extra color or taste, which is not usually natural. Tony doesn't like it because that's not usually good for your health. But anyway, remember a balanced diet. You might eat junk food, processed food, but as long as you don't eat too much of that, you're okay. And now I will move to the last part of the conversation when we sat at the table and Tony was trying to be a good host. Well, actually, he was a very good host and the food was delicious. But I'm just going to focus on a couple of phrases he used that could have been said in a better way. The first thing he said, who wants to eat a second plate? Well, I explained it to you before. A plate is just this physical thing where you put food, but you don't usually eat it. What should Tony say? Instead of saying who wants to eat a second plate, you can simply say who wants seconds. That's all. Who wants seconds? To be a good host, and the host obviously is the person who has invited the guests. To be a good host, you might want to ask this. You want your guests to feel comfortable and you want to show them how generous you are. You want to ask them if they want a second serving of something by just saying who wants seconds. Or if you want to be more polite, of course, you can say who would like seconds. But between friends, who wants is perfectly okay. And then Tony said about the dressing that there's more dressing for the salad. He said, just do it yourself. Well, so it's okay, Tony. That's fine. But for me, I understood what he was trying to say. But that is rude. Instead of saying just do it yourself, you say help yourself. Just help yourself. Help yourself means serve yourself, and it is a polite way. It's like I'm saying just make yourself at home, something like that. Well, in a way, the actual meaning, I'm actually saying do it yourself, serve yourself. But when I say serve yourself or do it yourself, that comes off a little bit rude. instead of that, if we want to sound polite, and we do want to sound polite if we are the hosts, we say just help yourself. And one last thing about what Tony said, he talked about sweet dishes. He said make sure to keep a bit of room for some sweet dishes. Well, I can't imagine how many sweet dishes were we going to eat that night. But obviously Tony was just talking about the one sweet dish he prepared for us. And instead of saying that, he should have said maybe dessert, pudding, a sweet, or afters. So instead, he should have said, be sure to keep a bit of room for some pudding or for some dessert or for some afters. And then he said, do you want me to fill your glass again? Well, it feels like, he didn't say it this way, of course, but it feels like somebody is telling you, do you want me to fill your glass again? Oh my God, you drink too much. Something like that. That leaves this impression. But obviously, Tony was just trying to tell me, can I refill your glass? Instead of fill your glass again, he should say, can I refill? Or would you like me, etc. Refill your glass. And that's all about our food talk. I hope you found it useful. The most important thing is to understand that nothing is actually bad, but it's always good to have better English, to make our conversations better. And that is what I told Tony. We talked about the words he could have used to make his conversation better, and the next time we were invited to his house, it was much better. So thank you very much for listening to this episode, and I hope you found the words I shared with you today useful, and I hope you use all these words to improve your conversation. Because remember, this is all about conversation. You're learning words to use them in your conversations. If you're not going to use them in conversation, don't bother learning any new words. That's why you need to understand the context where you can use them and why they are important to learn. This is your host, Danny, saying thank you very much for listening to another episode from Perfect English with Danny. I will see you in the next episode.